Good morning, church. I just have to say again, I love this church. So many good things happening. It's so exciting to see so many of these things come together, things that have been talked about for so many months. And I know that you are even more excited than I am because you're in the midst of this. I'll tell you, I'll do the elephant in the middle of the room. I told Kim I should make a better story up about this, like I got in a fight or something on the side of my face. Actually, when you get old like I do, you have to go to the dermatologist every now and then, and they say, "Hey, let me take care of that for you." That's why my face looks like I fell off a tractor or something. But that's what that's about. I'm so glad to be here with you this week. It's been so wonderful to be with you here for the last several months, and especially this summer as we have gone through this series together, looking at what life must have been like for those Hebrew people, the Israelites, after they went through the Exodus, one of the defining moments of human history. So this morning, I want us to consider that again. What must it have been like in those days after the Exodus? I've asked that question multiple times over the last several weeks as we've gathered in this room together. And we followed the Israelites into many different places. We've walked with them as they left Egypt and walked through the Red Sea on dry ground into the wilderness. We were here together, sitting at the base of Sinai as Moses ascended the top of the mountain and the people waited there in the valley. And then as he came down, and we were there to listen to the first reading of the Ten Commandments. Last week, when we were here in this room, we kind of wondered together what must have the conversation been like between Moses and Joshua after Moses made the big mistake in ministry. So we've wondered together what life must have been like in those days after the Exodus. But before we turn our attention to other things beginning this fall, I have to ask one more question about these wandering Hebrews. After spending all of that time together in the wilderness, what must it have been like for them to finally exit the wilderness and to move into the land that God had promised them for so long? There is something sacred about moving into a new place. The old is gone, the new has come. When the Israelites finally entered Canaan, I know this much. They were a changed people. These were not the same people that left Egypt 40 years earlier, both literally and figuratively. Now, literally, we know they literally were not the same people. The people that left Egypt had died in the wilderness, and the group that was about to go into the promised land, they were born in the wilderness. But symbolically and figuratively, these people were not the same anymore. These were not the scared slaves that exited Egypt, standing there by the Red Sea, wondering if God had only brought them out in the wilderness to have them killed right from the very beginning. When these Hebrews entered Canaan, they were seasoned, tested, changed people. And what I want to suggest to you this morning is that the wilderness has a tendency to do that to people. It has a tendency to change us. And in fact, if you look throughout Scripture from beginning to end, you'll notice that the wilderness is not just a place, it's really a metaphor. And you see this from beginning to end. Wilderness is a metaphor signifying those places in life that are far away from God. And you see this all the way through. The temple in Israel was believed to be the place that literally housed the presence of God. God resided in the temple, and the further one moved away from the temple, the further one moved away from the presence of God. And so the wilderness, which is far away from the temple, was viewed as a place that was very far away from God. Consider certain stories throughout the Bible. When Cain killed his brother Abel, Do you remember what happened to him? He was sentenced to go where? Out in the wilderness, right? On the Day of Atonement, every year the high priest would gather the assembly together and he would lay his hands on the so-called scapegoat, bring all the sins of the community onto the goat. And where would they send that goat? Out into the wilderness, far away from God. When Jesus is tempted by Satan, do you remember where that happens? It's in the wilderness. When Israel displeased God right after the Exodus, they were sentenced to wander around in the wilderness. The wilderness is the place where it is difficult to see God. Yet ironically, here's one of the great ironies of all Scripture. Ironically, it is also in the wilderness where people learn to see God more clearly and to trust God more fully. So I want you to think about some of the things that we just mentioned. In the wilderness, east of Eden, after Cain was sent out, do you remember what happened to Cain? God found Cain and protected him in the wilderness. When Elijah fled after his confrontation with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and he hears that Jezebel is after him and he's scared to death, he runs off into the wilderness, a place that was far from God. But do you remember what happened in the wilderness? God found Elijah in the wilderness. And the text tells us that the angels attended to him as he was there in the wilderness. When Satan tempted Jesus, after the temptation was over and Jesus is still in the wilderness, do you remember what happened? The angels came and attended to Jesus there in the wilderness. When Israel moved out into the wilderness, wandering around all this time, despite all of their hardships, despite all of the mistakes that they made and their continual grumbling and the diseases and the plagues and all the discomfort that they endured, it was in the wilderness that the people of Israel finally saw God clearly and learned to trust God more fully. The wilderness is a weird place. It's a place that's seemingly far away from God, but it's in that place also that we learn to see God and trust God. The people of Israel did learn to trust God when they were in the wilderness. I want you to think back through these stories and think about the moments that they experienced and how much the Hebrews changed over time during their wandering. Early on in their journey, they are continually questioning the power of God. Do you remember? I don't think we covered this story this summer. I know I did. I don't think any of the other preachers did either. But do you remember the story when the spies are sent into the land? It's just a few months into their journey into the wilderness. And God says, send spies into the land. They go and they look and they come back and their report is, oh, they're too big. They're too numerous. There's no way they will make it. They're scared to death. That's a picture of Israel early on in their experience with the wilderness. Do you remember how many of them responded when God first began to send them manna from heaven? We want meat. We can't eat this stuff all day long. This isn't good enough. And then when God tells them you can gather on 6 days, but on the seventh day, don't gather anything. I'll provide for you. Do you remember some of them said, well, he doesn't really mean that. I'm sure it'll be okay if we just gather a little bit. You know, we'll just go out there and it'll be okay. And they didn't trust God. What about that whole scene at the base of Mount Sinai? Moses is up on the mountain. The people are down there in the valley and they got scared. They thought that God had abandoned them. And so they built this graven image of Yahweh. And we could go on and on and on describing the multiple ways in which Israel fell short of God's expectations. The ways in which they continually lost sight of God. The ways in which over and over and over again they failed to trust God. This was their story. This is who they were. But when we meet the people of Israel here in the beginning of the book of Joshua, things are different. They are a different people. If you were to look in the book of Joshua, chapter 3, you'll begin to see signs of their change. God says through Joshua to the elders in Joshua 3, go stand in the middle of the Jordan River at flood stage. At flood stage. This is typically not a great idea. Have you ever seen a river at flood stage? But God says, go stand in the middle of the river at flood stage, and what do? They do it immediately. They don't ask any questions. They just do it. And then if you read a little bit further on in the next chapter, in Joshua chapter 4, God tells them, take stones from the Jordan River and then build a monument here to commemorate what's happened on this day. And without grumbling, without questioning, without asking a single question, the people of Israel walk into the river and they gather these huge boulders. They're so big, text tells us they had to carry them on their shoulders. They bring them back to the bank and they build this monument to commemorate this thing that God is doing among them. If you were to read on a little bit further into the book of Joshua, you would see what happens when they come to the city of Jericho. What a wonderful story. God tells them, I want you to go to the city of Jericho and I want you to walk around. I don't want you to attack. I just want you to walk around it for 6 days and blow your trumpets. And then on the 7th day, I want you to go out to the city of Jericho again. I want you to walk around it not once, but 7 times. And then I want you to blow the trumpets and I want you to yell really loud. That's absurd. I mean, that's crazy talk. But they do it without a question. They just follow everything God wants them to do suddenly. As you read through this story over and over and over again, through the story of Exodus, and then you come to this place in the conquest of Canaan, you should be asking yourself a really important question. What happened to change these people? These are not the same people that left Egypt. These are not the same people that are grumbling over and over again throughout the wilderness. So what happened? It's really simple, church. Life in the wilderness with God changes you. It just does. Have any of you in this room ever spent time in the wilderness? If you have, I know something about you, even without asking the question. I know that you're a different person. There's a great little text in the book of Ezekiel, a book that we don't pay much attention to, honestly. It's in the 46th chapters describing a worship service. There was a period in Israel's history when they went to worship, they did something very peculiar. And I just want you to read or listen to this one text. It says, when the people of the land come before the Lord at the appointed festivals, whoever enters by the north gate to worship shall go out by the south gate. And whoever enters by the south gate shall go out by the north gate. They shall not return by way of the gate by which they entered, but shall go out straight ahead. Do you understand what's happening here? There was a period in Israel's history when they went to worship. They determined that they were not going to enter and leave by the same door. And what they were saying is that when we come to encounter God, we are so changed and so different that we have to leave by a different door because we are different people. We're not going to come in and go out the same way, go back to the same routines, doing the same things that we've always done. When we come into a place and we encounter God in a special way, God changes us and we will leave and we will be different. That's what happens with life in the wilderness. There was a book that was written several years ago by a psychologist named Larry Crabb. The title of the book is called The Pressure's Off. A great little book. But he uses a story in that book to show how over time God changes us. I just want to read that little story to you. It's a really good illustration. He writes this way. He says, on Saturday afternoon, I decided that I was a big boy and could use the bathroom without anybody's help. He's a little child. So I climbed the stairs, I closed the locked door behind me, and for the next few moments, I felt very self-sufficient. Then it was time to leave, and I could not unlock the door. I tried with every ounce of my 3-year-old strength, but I couldn't do it. I panicked. I felt again like a very little boy as a thought went through my head, I might spend the rest of my life in this bathroom. My parents and likely the neighbors next door heard my desperate scream. Are you okay? Mother shouted through the door. She couldn't come in from the outside. Did you fall? Did you hit your head? I can't unlock the door, I said. Get me out of here. I wasn't aware of it right then, he says, but my dad had raced down the stairs, run to the garage, found the ladder, hauled it off the hooks, leaned it up against the side of the house just beneath the bedroom window, and with adult strength, he pried it open, climbed into my prison, walked past me, and with that same strength, turned the lock and opened the door. Thanks, Dad, I said, and I ran out to play. He continues, he says, that's how I thought the Christian life was supposed to work. When I get stuck in a tight place, I should do all I can to free myself. And when I can't, I should pray. And then God shows up and he hears my cry, get me out of here, I want to play. And God unlocks the door and the blessings arrive that I desire. Sometimes God does that. But now, no longer 3 years old, but approaching 60, I'm realizing the Christian life doesn't work that way. And I wonder, are any of us content with God? Do we even like God when he doesn't open the door that we most want opened? When a marriage doesn't heal? When rebellious kids still rebel, when friends betray, when financial reverses threaten our comfortable way of life, when the prospect of terrorism looms, when health worsens despite much prayer, when loneliness intensifies and depression deepens, when ministries die. God has climbed through the small window into my dark room, he says, but he doesn't walk by me and turn the lock that I couldn't budge. Instead, God sits down on the bathroom floor and says, come sit with me. God seems to think that climbing into the room to be with me matters more than letting me out to play. I don't always see it that way. Get me out of here, I scream. If you love me, just unlock the door. Dear friend, the choice is yours. Either we can keep asking God to give us what we think will make us happy, to escape our dark room, run onto the playground of blessings, or we can accept God's invitation to sit with him for now, perhaps in darkness, and to seize the opportunity to know him better and represent him well in this difficult world. There have been times in my life that all I wanted for God to do was unlock the door and let me out to play. Just get me through this, get me on the other side so that I can get back to life. Life, however, has taught me, believe it or not, that there are some things more important than my comfort, than my joy, even than my happiness. Life in the wilderness, life in time alone with God, has taught me to trust God more. When I can't open the door, and there have been times when I just cannot open the door, no matter how hard I push, no matter how loud I scream, in those moments I have learned that God will not leave me alone in those moments. And I bet some of you have learned that too. And I wonder, how has God changed you in the wilderness? I thought a lot about this sermon for a while, thinking about what I would say to you and whether or not I would say what I'm about to say to you, but I'm going to say it. I think in many ways, Heritage has been hanging out in the wilderness. I think you have. In some ways, over the last several years, I think that you've experienced the perfect storm. All sorts of things have happened at once. So in your desire to make the gospel come alive in our time and in our place in new ways, you challenged a long-held practice within our tradition in Churches of Christ, and you began to offer worship with instruments. In order to create a place where all voices are heard and appreciated, you have brought women to the stage and into positions of leadership. It's interesting that even this morning we're celebrating Bonnie's appointment as executive minister in this church. You've also had a long-time minister first retire from his role in preaching and then pass away in short order. You've had other ministers who have been here a long time transition into something else. And my goodness, then you had COVID. And you had members leave. And along with members leaving, you had budget leave. And all of those things are hard. And you didn't have those things one at a time. My goodness, you had them all at once. You spent a lot of time in the wilderness. And there is a temptation when we find ourselves in the wilderness to beg God to just unlock the door so we can get out on the other side and we can do the things that we've always done. Let's just get through this so that we can do those ministries that we've always loved. Let's just get things back to normal. And what I want to say to you, church, maybe you don't need to just get back to normal. I believe that it's possible that as you found yourself in this wilderness, as you've been sitting alone with God on the bathroom floor, I think it's possible that God may have taught you some things about yourself and about this church. And I hope, I pray, that when that door is finally unlocked in church, the door's about to be unlocked. As you cross the Jordan and enter into a new land, I hope that you will leave changed, as committed as ever to the mission that God has laid at your feet, but ready and willing to think differently about how to engage that mission in this time and in this new place. In other words, I pray that you will not waste a really good wilderness experience, because God may have brought you to this moment and to this place for a reason. There is something often sacred about moving into a new land. The old is gone, but the new has come. And my prayer is that we, like Israel before us, standing on the other side of the wilderness, will be a changed people. And as we set our feet in new land, we must remember the same God who made the Exodus possible. That's the same God that offers us new life on the other side of this wilderness. May God give us eyes to see and hearts to trust as we move forward into that new place.